The night had a strange, almost electric stillness to it, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Liam wandered along the beach, the sand cold and damp beneath his bare feet, tiny grains sticking to the soles like the remnants of forgotten memories. The moon hung low in the sky, silver and swollen, spilling light across the waves that churned with an unnatural rhythm, larger and more violent than usual, rolling toward the shore as though the ocean itself had an urgent message to deliver. Liam's small hands trembled slightly, half from the chill and half from the pull of a strange curiosity that had driven him here, away from the safety of the house, away from the glow of his bedroom light, into the unknown. The sea whispered in a language he could almost understand, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through his bones, tugging at something deep within his chest that he didn't yet recognize. And then he saw it, an odd ripple in the water, a glimmer that moved against the tide's natural flow, shimmering amber and green like molten jewels, impossible in their intensity. He froze, unsure whether to run or reach out, his heart pounding so violently he feared it might escape his chest entirely. The glow grew larger, closer, and then from the frothing waves, the creature emerged, as if sculpted from every nightmare and fairy tale he had ever heard. Its form was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a twisting amalgam of scales, fins, and something darker, more alien, its skin slick and wet, reflecting the moonlight in prismatic flashes. The eyes met his, two molten orbs that glowed with an intelligence that made his stomach knot in fear and fascination all at once. It made a sound, low and bubbling, a gurgle that could have been a growl or a greeting. Liam, against every instinct screaming at him to run, stepped forward. Hey, do you need help? His voice was barely a whisper, swallowed almost immediately by the sound of the waves crashing against jagged rocks. The creature tilted its head, and in that motion, Liam felt a shiver of recognition, as if it somehow understood him, as if it had been waiting for him. He held out a trembling hand, and the water lapped at his fingers. A tentacle-like fin brushed his palm, cold and soft, sending a jolt of electricity straight to his nervous system. Liam staggered back, but not away. Closer, drawn by a force he couldn't name. The creature seemed to pulse with life, its eyes brightening as though reflecting his own heartbeat. And then, without warning, a wave slammed against the rocks, higher than any natural tide should have been, and Nereus recoiled, only for a moment, before its attention returned to him. The incident should have frightened him, made him reconsider, but it did the opposite. Liam's fascination grew into obsession, an unspoken promise that he would see this creature through, whatever it demanded. He crouched near the surf, his hand brushing the wet sand as Nereus slithered closer, its body folding and undulating in ways that defied any human logic. The fog thickened, rolling inland like tendrils, swallowing the outline of distant cottages, muting the world behind it. And then he noticed something unsettling. The small crabs that usually spettled across the sand were frozen in place, their tiny bodies motionless, their shells reflecting the eerie light from Nereus. He blinked, thinking it a trick of the mist, but no. The creatures remained still, as if the life around him was being suspended, paused in homage or fear of this impossible visitor. Suddenly, a distant scream shattered the quiet, high and thin, cutting through the rhythm of the waves. Liam jumped back, heart hammering, but Nereus didn't flinch. Instead, it moved closer, almost shielding him from the world. The scream came again, closer now, then silenced, as though someone, or something, had vanished before his eyes. Liam's mind raced. Was it connected? Could it have been Nereus? His rational mind, the part of him still tethered to reality, screamed to leave, to run home, to never return to this cursed shoreline. But the pull of Nereus was magnetic, inexorable, a strange gravity in the night air. He felt an unspoken promise in its gaze, an expectation that he would not flee, that he would see what lay beneath the surface, that he would bear witness to something no one else could. And then came the twist, subtle but undeniable. Liam noticed the water itself behaving oddly, not just the tides, but the small ripples at his feet. Shapes moved beneath the surface, fleeted and distorted, shadows that mimicked creatures he had seen in nightmares and myths. Tentacles, fins, and glowing eyes vanishing as soon as he tried to focus. The sand seemed to shift under his weight, forming slight impressions that weren't his own, as if the beach was alive with invisible observers. Liam's breath hitched. He realized that Nereus was not merely a creature, it was a force, a fragment of the ocean made sentient, and its loyalty was not just to him. It was a contract, a subtle, binding bond he hadn't yet understood. A chill ran down his spine. Friendship, he suddenly recognized, was never free. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning here. Liam stayed, entranced, speaking softly to Nereus, naming it, promising it protection. And yet, every small movement in the waves, every faint whisper of fog curling toward him, hinted at consequences. The distant lights of the town flickered, then dimmed. A low growl, almost imperceptible beneath the roar of the ocean, rumbled through the sand and into Liam's bones. His skin prickled. And then, without warning, a sudden gust of wind slammed into him, carrying a scent both sweet and rotten, of salt and decay. He stumbled backward, gripping the sand, heart racing, and when he looked up, Nereus had shifted, its glowing eyes locking on him with something that was no longer just curious, it was demanding. It nudged him gently, insistent but gentle, a warning he didn't yet understand. Liam's mind spun with 1,000 questions. Could it survive without him? Did it need him in some way he could not yet grasp? And then a shadow moved along the fog, another form, impossible and distorted, larger than any fish he had ever seen, something that watched from the water's edge before it dissolving into the mist. Liam's heart surged. He realized that he had stepped into a world beneath the world, a hidden layer of existence where Nereus was both king and prisoner, and now, by choosing to befriend it, he had crossed a line he could never uncross. By the time the first faint gray of dawn touched the horizon, Liam and Nereus remained there, two figures against the endless, restless sea. The mist lingered, and the beach seemed to breathe around them, alive in ways no human eye could fully perceive. Liam's hands were raw from gripping wet sand, but he did not care. He could not turn away. Somewhere in the distance, he heard faint cries, a mixture of human and something else, but the fog swallowed the sounds before he could identify them. He shivered, not from cold, but from the unspoken understanding that the night had marked him, tied him to a force that demanded both loyalty and sacrifice, that loyalty alone might not be enough to keep him or the town safe. And as Nereus's amber eyes glimmered in the first morning light, a question echoed through Liam's mind, chilling in its clarity. How far would I go to keep a friend when that friend demands a price I may not be able to pay? The waves lapped gently now, masking the horrors beneath, but Nereus knew the ocean was patient. It remembered, and it would wait.
Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more awesome videos. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.
The morning light filtered through Liam's bedroom window, pale and hesitant, casting long, uneven shadows across the floorboards as he dragged Nereus inside, cradling it in a hastily prepared tank that rattled with each nervous movement. The creature, slick and shimmering with an otherworldly luminescence, hissed softly, curling its fins around the edges of the tank as if testing the boundaries of its new confinement. Liam's heart pounded, both from fear and excitement, the strange exhilaration of harboring something so alive and alien, throbbing in his veins like wildfire. He set the tank carefully on the floor, lining the edges with damp towels to catch any escaping moisture, and for a moment just stared. Nereus's eyes, glowing amber and impossibly intelligent, tracked his every movement, the gaze so intense that Liam felt naked under its scrutiny. The creature seemed to study him, weighing him, testing his resolve, and Liam realized with a sudden, sinking clarity that it was not just a pet, it was a presence, alive in ways humans could not fathom, and its loyalty would come at a cost he could not yet name. He tried to smile, tried to speak soothingly, but his words faltered. "It's okay, you're safe, I won't let anyone hurt you." Even as he spoke, a tremor of unease rippled through the air, subtle and almost imperceptible, like the faint quiver of strings before a bell tolls. The room felt heavier, thicker, as though the walls themselves were absorbing the gravity of the creature he had brought home. He busied himself with the tank, adding water from a large bucket he had filled, the liquid steaming faintly as it mixed, carrying the scent of salt and ocean deep into the bedroom. Nereus moved with a fluid grace, tentacles curling, fins undulating in a hypnotic rhythm, and each movement seemed to draw the light toward it, as though the creature was bending the world around itself, distorting reality ever so slightly. Liam flinched when he realized the small fish he had left in a bowl on the dresser were floating lifelessly, pale eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. His stomach lurched. The connection was immediate, undeniable. Nereus had reacted, or perhaps had demanded its presence, its influence reaching beyond the tank, altering life in subtle, deadly ways. He wanted to cry, to flee, to undo everything. But the pull of curiosity, of fascination, was far stronger than reason. He whispered, almost apologetically, "I didn't mean, I'm sorry." And for a moment, the creature shivered in response, almost remorseful, but the hunger in its eyes remained. The day stretched on with an unnatural stillness. Liam tried to focus on homework, on cartoons, anything to anchor himself to normalcy, but the shadows seemed deeper here, flickering oddly in corners, and the distant sound of the ocean, though miles away, throbbed at his ears, a constant reminder of the bond he had forged. He noticed other oddities. The neighborhood cat, usually brazen and curious, refused to cross the threshold of his yard, hissing at the empty air as though some invisible predator lurked just beyond sight. A neighbor's dog, chained in its yard, whimpered incessantly, pacing in a circle, its fur bristling as it stared toward Liam's house with a fearful intelligence. He tried to ignore it, but unease settled over him like a heavy blanket. Even the sun, high in the sky, felt muted, the warmth dulled as though the world itself were holding its breath. Nereus, meanwhile, had grown restless in its tank, its movements sharp, deliberate, almost imperious. Liam could see the faint glow of amber under its scales intensifying at intervals, pulsing with an internal rhythm that felt eerily like a heartbeat, one synchronized with his own in unpredictable ways. He shivered, realizing that his every emotion, every hesitation might be reflected, mirrored, or even manipulated by this creature. By evening, the influence of Nereus had begun to creep further into the town itself. From his bedroom window, Liam could see strange patterns in the sky, a haze rolling along the horizon that didn't belong, fog tinged with green and silver, curling and twisting unnaturally, swallowing the lights of houses as it crept closer to the street. Liam rubbed his eyes, hoping it was fatigue, but the shadows moved independently, stretching and bending as if alive, reacting to the unseen presence that now hovered over his world. The tide had risen unusually far, creeping along the shoreline, reaching for the houses closest to the water, and in the distance, lights flickered out in a neighboring home. Liam's pulse quickened as a sharp scream cut through the thickening fog, muffled yet piercing, followed by silence that felt heavier than the sound itself. The logical part of his brain told him to call for help, to flee, to tell someone, anyone. But the other part, darker, more enthralled, whispered that revealing Nereus would unleash consequences he could not undo. The creature, he realized, demanded secrecy, demanded that the world remain unaware of its existence, and he was its keeper, its confidant, its unwilling accomplice. That night, Liam stayed in his room, refusing to sleep, watching Nereus as it moved fluidly through the tank, occasionally pressing its glowing eyes against the glass, communicating in ways beyond speech. At one point, it reached out with a fin, brushing against a small pendant Liam had dropped, and in the faint ripple of water, the room seemed to distort, walls bowing, shadows twisting in impossible geometries. Liam stumbled back, breath catching, and realized with dawning horror that the creature's presence wasn't confined to the tank, it extended beyond it, bending space, influencing life, rewriting reality in small, subtle ways that made his blood run cold. Outside, faint lights twitched, then died. The wind moaned through the trees, carrying whispers that sounded like voices he had never heard before, crying warnings or demands. He could not tell which. The neighborhood became a stage for unseen manipulation, as if the tides of the earth and the sea conspired with Nereus in a choreography Liam could barely comprehend. And then came the moment of first real terror. Liam's mother called for him, her voice carrying from downstairs, bright and unaware. "Liam, dinner!" He froze. Panic gripped him. If she saw Nereus, if she realized what he had done, he didn't know what she would do or what the creature might do. The pendant that had been brushed by Nereus began to glow faintly, a soft, pulsing amber light, and Liam noticed that the edges of the tank's water rippled without any physical cause. He stifled a gasp, pressing himself against the wall, silent as shadows dripped along the floor like ink. When he finally ventured a glance downstairs, the living room seemed subtly off. Objects were slightly displaced, the air thicker, the faint smell of brine hanging where it should not, and the faintest scratch of movement echoed through the walls, impossible to locate. Liam understood then, in gut-sickening clarity, that Nereus had extended itself, marking its territory in the house, asserting influence that he neither invited nor could resist. Sleep came fitfully, with dreams that blurred the lines between ocean and land. Liam dreamed of shadows beneath the street, of hands, human and otherwise, reaching through the fog, whispering promises and threats. He woke suddenly to a sound of shattering glass, heart leaping. The tank was intact, yet the window nearest it had faint cracks, tiny spiderweb fractures that radiated outward. Nereus's eyes glowed brighter than ever, fixed at Liam with an almost pleading insistence, and in that moment he felt an unmistakable command: protect me, obey me, keep me safe, sacrifice if you must. Liam's small chest heaved as he realized the depth of the bond he had formed. It was not merely friendship, it was a covenant, silent yet binding, and the first cost had already been paid, though the ledger remained invisible. The days that followed, strange occurrences intensified. Small animals disappeared from neighboring yards. Fish in aquariums outside his home turned belly up with unnatural frequency. The fog rolled in earlier, thicker, curling down streets and alleys in a silver-green haze, swallowing familiar landmarks and replacing them with uncertainty and dread. People he had known, neighbors who had waved to him just days before, were absent, their houses shuttered, abandoned, as if swallowed by the world itself. And Nereus, bound to him yet alien in every sense, watched with an unblinking patience, gliding in the tank, occasionally pressing its glowing eyes to Liam, communicating. The town had begun to feel like a place suspended between reality and nightmare. The fog, a constant living presence that moved with purpose, curling down streets, seeping into yards, and pressing against windows like icy fingers probing for weakness. And Liam could feel the weight of it all from the confines of his bedroom, where Nereus pulsed in its tank with an unsettling intelligence that seemed to measure not only his heartbeat, but the very state of his soul. The boy's eyes, rimmed red and heavy from sleepless nights, darted constantly between the creature and the window, watching shadows flicker unnaturally, listening to the faint gurgle of water beneath the boards of the house that no plumbing could account for, as if the ocean itself had reached inside, threading invisible currents through the structure to communicate with Nereus. He could not leave the room. He could not escape. Every time he tried, the subtle pull of the creature's presence drew him back, magnetic and impossible to resist. Outside, the town was unraveling. The tides had grown unpredictable and violent, smashing boats into piers, flooding streets, and carrying with them debris from distant shores, driftwood, wreckage, and strange objects that seemed almost ritualistic, as though the ocean itself were delivering warnings in a language he could not yet decipher. The fog had thickened to an unnatural density, hiding entire houses from view, muting the familiar sounds of life, dog barks, car engines, children laughing, and replacing them with silence that was anything but peaceful, broken only by faint, indistinct whispers that drifted through the mist like ghostly incantations. Liam realized with a cold jolt of fear that Nereus was not merely present, it was orchestrating these events, manipulating the environment with an intelligence both terrifying and mesmerizing, and every death, disappearance, and flood seemed to resonate with its pulse, each subtle glow of amber in its eyes a reminder that the creature's survival depended on him, and the price of disobedience was far higher than he could yet comprehend. He had tried to rationalize, to convince himself that Nereus was harmless, that it simply responded to the environment, that it could not intentionally cause harm, but the evidence was irrefutable. Fish floated lifelessly in every tank and pond he could see through the fog. Neighbors who had once waved to him vanished without explanation, and shadows moved in patterns that mimicked human forms, but stretched and contorted in impossible ways, disappearing when approached, leaving only a sense of presence heavier than air itself. And then came the night when the fog pressed directly against the house, thick as silk, almost tangible, curling through the cracks beneath the door, carrying with it the scent of salt and decay. And Liam knew with a sickening clarity that it was not just a fog. It was an extension of Nereus, a physical manifestation of the creature's will that demanded recognition, obedience, attention. He could feel it brushing against his consciousness, a subtle coercion that whispered in the back of his mind, "Protect me, serve me, sacrifice if necessary." And Liam, a boy with a moral compass that had not yet hardened to the cruelty of the world, felt himself falter under the weight of this silent command, torn between love and fear, between instinctual compassion for his neighbors and an inexplicable loyalty to a creature that was both friend and predator. The first direct test came subtly, almost imperceptibly one night, when a faint knock echoed from the front door, muffled by the thick fog, hesitant but persistent. Liam approached, heart hammering, peering through the keyhole to see a neighbor, a young woman who lived 2 houses down, standing in the haze. She raised a hand, waving almost cheerfully, but as he watched, her expression shifted, features stretching unnaturally, eyes growing wide and hollow, her mouth opening in a silent scream, a visage of fear and pleading that tore at his heart. And then she vanished, evaporating into the mist, leaving only the echo of her last gesture, and Liam stumbled back, gasping, realizing that the consequences of his secrecy and his bond were now painfully visible, tangible, and irreversible. Nereus pulsed with heightened intensity, amber light flaring in the tank as if acknowledging that the first act had been necessary, that his inaction had been noticed and weighed. Panic surged through him, but he also felt an unshakable compulsion to stay, to comply, to nurture the creature, because any hesitation, any defiance, might invite consequences even more terrifying than those already unfolding. Days blurred into nights, indistinguishable, and the boy's life became a delicate, terrifying balancing act. He watched the town disintegrate from his window, the fog swallowing familiar landmarks, tides rising at unnatural hours, and the occasional glimpse of people or animals that did not belong, twisted and ghost-like, walking through streets that should have been empty. And through it all, Nereus moved fluidly in its tank, sometimes flaring amber light, sometimes pressing against the glass, communicating with subtle, almost hypnotic movements that Liam could not ignore. The moral dilemma gnawed at him relentlessly. The creature was loyal, even affectionate in its own alien way, yet every act of protection or obedience required consequences he could not bear. Small sacrifices at first, fish, animals, but soon the implications became clearer, heavier, stretching outward into human lives, the safety of the town, the very boundaries of natural law. He tried reasoning out loud, negotiating with it, whispering pleas, begging it to let him find a different way. But Nereus's pulse only responded, undulating, insistent, a silent insistence that survival came at a price. And that price, sooner or later, might require more than he was prepared to give. The escalating pattern became undeniable. On one particularly harrowing night, Liam ventured into the backyard to retrieve a bucket of water, only to find the fog thicker than ever, rolling over the lawn like a living tide, carrying with it a strange briny scent that made his stomach twist. Shadows moved through it, large, writhing forms that seemed to belong neither to land nor sea, glinting with scales or fins that caught the sparse light in unsettling ways. He froze as he saw the neighbor's cat emerge from the haze, fur matted, eyes wide and glowing faintly in reflection of Nereus's light. The animal hissed and twisted unnaturally, and in an instant it disappeared, leaving only a wet, glistening paw print on the grass, a subtle, terrifying message that the boy's inaction could carry consequences beyond comprehension. He stumbled backwards, tripping over uneven stones, and the fog thickened again, swallowing his small figure, pressing against him with the weight of unseen currents. When he returned to the house, the creature's amber eyes glowed brighter than ever, its body pressing against the tank as if sensing the tension, the fear, and the moral conflict consuming him. Liam's throat tightened with guilt and terror. He understood fully that Nereus was not simply loyal, it was dependent, and the survival of the creature required him to make choices that violated the very core of his innocence. Sleep became a battleground. Liam dreamed of tidal waves swallowing entire streets, neighbors' faces melting into the mist, and Nereus, enormous now, looming over the town with amber eyes blazing, demanding compliance. He awoke with his sheets soaked in sweat, heart racing, the faint glow of Nereus's eyes greeting him as if nothing had changed, as if the dreams had been preparation rather than mere figments. And he began to notice subtle signs of obedience required. A stray animal left outside had to be brought in or it would die inexplicably. A neighbor's unattended lantern, if not extinguished, would explode in a flash of greenish flame that scorched the earth in a patchy burn pattern. Even trivial acts, like leaving his room for a moment without tending to the tank, resulted in small, horrifying shifts in the environment. Faint distortions in the fog, whispers in the walls, and the sense of countless eyes observing every decision. Each day, the moral stakes grew heavier, the burden pressing down on his small shoulders like the weight of the tide itself. The crescendo came one night when the fog rolled in so thick that the world outside the window vanished entirely. Liam could see nothing beyond the outline of the tank and the amber glow of Nereus. A sudden, guttural sound emerged from the mist. A cry, human and animal all at once, filled with anguish and confusion. Liam pressed his palms against the glass of the tank, staring into Nereus's eyes, seeking guidance, seeking reassurance. And in the pulsing amber, he read an undeniable truth. Obedience was no longer a choice. To fail, even once, risked unleashing chaos, death, and disappearance that would ripple far beyond the confines of his home. The boy's mind raced, Could he survive this burden? Could he maintain his humanity in the face of such relentless demands? He realized with horror that the creature was a mirror of the ocean itself, beautiful, enigmatic, loyal, yet utterly indifferent to the fragility of human life, demanding fidelity in action and punishing hesitation in ways he could barely comprehend. By the end of that night, Liam understood fully that his life had changed irrevocably. He could never return to the world of ordinary childhood. He was tethered to a... The night pressed down like a living weight, heavier than any Liam had felt before, each heartbeat echoing in his chest as if the house itself were amplifying the tension. And beyond his walls, the fog had thickened into a suffocating, almost solid mass that crept along streets, curling around corners and swallowing streetlights until the familiar world of his neighborhood had been transformed into a shifting, alien landscape. Liam stood by the window, eyes wide and unblinking, watching as the tide rolled in far beyond its natural boundaries, waves rising unnaturally, crashing against houses and docks with a violence that seemed orchestrated by a conscious hand, carrying with it flotsam and debris that made no sense in the calm of the night. Nereus glimmered in its tank beside him, fins undulating with deliberate hypnotic grace, amber eyes burning with intelligence, observing the chaos outside with a patience that chilled him to his core. The boy's stomach churned as he realized that every unnatural event, the dead fish floating in ponds and tanks, the neighbors who had vanished without trace, the thick spectral fog pressing against homes, the tides behaving as though possessed, was tied to the creature he had named, the bond that he had nurtured with such innocent affection, now revealed as a chain, with links forged from consequence, loyalty, and unseen demands. And, for the first time, Liam understood fully that this was no longer a simple choice of friendship. Survival itself required obedience, moral compromises that weighed him down with every breath. He forced himself away from the window, pacing the room in restless circles, eyes darting to the tank where Nereus moved with hypnotic fluidity, the water shimmering in unnatural patterns as if alive with the pulse of the ocean itself. Liam's thoughts raced. He had tried to shelter it, to protect it from discovery, but the creature's influence had seeped outward beyond the walls, into the streets, into the lives of neighbors and their pets, into the tide, and even into the creeping fog. Each movement of Nereus seemed to ripple into reality, a quiet manipulation that he could feel pressing against his conscience, tugging at the moral boundaries of what he could endure. He saw the first victim of the night through the mist outside, a small fishing boat bobbing listlessly near the pier, unmanned, nets trailing in the water, fish floating dead on its surface, their scales reflecting the eerie glow of the moon filtered through fog. A neighbor's lights went out in sudden succession. Another scream, distant and fragmented, tore across the air, swallowed immediately by the dense haze, leaving nothing but a hollow echo that reverberated through Liam's chest. And Nereus, watching him with those molten eyes, pulsed once, then twice, and Liam's heart clenched in understanding. Obedience was not optional. Sacrifice, action, even moral compromise, it had begun to demand more than he was prepared to offer, and yet he could not abandon it, could not betray the fragile, impossible loyalty that connected them. As the night deepened, the strange occurrences accelerated. Fish in the local river floated belly up, pale and rigid, shimmering faintly with the same amber hue as Nereus's eyes. Houses that had once been lively and warm stood shuttered, doors locked from the inside or left ajar as if abandoned hastily, their inhabitants nowhere to be seen, erased from the world with a casual, terrifying precision. Liam ventured carefully to the window again, noticing the faintest shapes moving just beyond the edge of perception, figures, perhaps human, perhaps something else, walking with a limp or a sway that defied natural motion, their outlines flickering in the silver-green fog, disappearing when he blinked. He felt the weight of responsibility crash down upon him. Every choice, Every hesitation, every delay risked more than just his own safety. And as he watched, Nereus thrashed in the tank suddenly, water spilling over the edges, fins pressing insistently against the glass, amber light flaring brighter than ever. And Liam realized with terror that it was not merely signaling him, it was commanding. He understood that the creature required acts of obedience, actions to ensure survival, and that the cost of failing might reach beyond fish and pets, reaching toward the living, toward the world itself. The moral dilemma gnawed at him relentlessly. Earlier that evening, Liam had discovered the remains of a neighbor's cat in the yard, fur matted with moisture, its eyes reflecting a faint, impossible amber glow, a small but undeniable sign that Nereus's reach was expanding, exacting subtle but painful sacrifices. He tried reasoning, pleading with it in whispers, promising to comply in ways he hoped would be sufficient, but Nereus's movements became sharper, more insistent, the light in its eyes flaring like a warning. Liam pressed his palms to the glass, voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want anyone else to get hurt." The creature pulsed slowly, deliberately, almost contemplatively, before shifting to a more agitated rhythm, and the boy's stomach twisted with fear. He was learning that loyalty came with demands he could not yet measure, that survival would require more than good intentions, more than affection, more than the innocence of a child's heart. The tide began to surge again, faster than before, waves breaking over the shoreline with deliberate violence, carrying odd objects, driftwood twisted into forms reminiscent of ancient symbols, fish corpses, and debris that made no sense in the calm of the night. The fog rolled in thicker, creeping into streets, alleys, and yards, muting the familiar sounds of the town. Liam could hear distant screams from neighbors, shouts muffled by the haze, and he realized with sickening clarity that the consequences of his choices or inaction were spreading. Nereus remained in the tank, fins undulating in a hypnotic pattern, eyes fixed at him with unwavering intensity, communicating a silent demand: act, comply, ensure survival. Every instinct in Liam screamed to resist, to flee, to abandon the creature and the impossible weight it carried, but he could not. Love, curiosity, and a profound sense of responsibility held him fast. The bond was no longer simply emotional, it was elemental, woven into the tides, the fog, and the unnatural occurrences that now defined the town as a world alien, dangerous, and irrevocably changed. By midnight, the escalation reached its peak. Liam watched as a neighbor's house collapsed inwards suddenly, walls caving, lights flickering and extinguishing in a single horrifying pulse, and he knew, with a clarity that chilled him, that inaction would have catastrophic consequences. Nereus pulsed violently, amber light flaring to illuminate the room in eerie spectral glow, and Liam realized that the creature's survival, and perhaps the town's fragile existence, depended entirely on him taking action, sacrifices he could not yet name. He scanned the streets through the thick fog, seeing vague shapes moving with unnatural intent, shadows twisting impossibly, and felt the weight of responsibility unevasively pressing against him. Obedience would save the creature, perhaps even preserve him, but at what cost? And defiance might endanger everyone he knew. The choice was no longer theoretical. It had become an impossible, immediate dilemma that pressed against his very chest with crushing force. Desperation mounted, and Liam began to act, moving through the room with trembling hands, checking the tank, soothing Nereus with quiet words, offering small gestures of compliance, placing food into the wire, adjusting the temperature, speaking softly. But each act was only a temporary appeasement. The fog outside swirled closer, tendrils brushing against the windows and walls, and the tide outside slammed violently against the shore, sending waves high into the streets, leaving debris and evidence of its unnatural force. The dead fish, the vanishing neighbors, the shadows in the fog, All were manifestations of the consequences of his choices, subtle or overt, and they felt them pressing into his consciousness like a tide he could not resist. Nereus glimmered, observing, pulsing, reminding him silently that loyalty was mandatory, that obedience was the currency of survival, and that the price, though not yet fully revealed, would soon demand more than a child could give without shattering entirely. Hours passed like centuries. Liam remained vigilant, monitoring the tank, the fog, the tide, and the streets. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision. Neighbors who had once been present now vanished, and even the familiar forms of trees and lampposts bent and twisted in subtle, impossible ways, influenced by a force he could neither see nor control. And through it all, Nereus moved fluidly in its tank, amber eyes glowing, fins curling in deliberate, mesmerizing rhythms that drew Liam into a trance-like awareness, binding his attention, his responsibility, and his moral dilemma into one inescapable weight. The boy realized fully that this was no longer a game, no longer a choice, no longer an experiment in friendship. Survival demanded obedience, moral compromise, and sacrifice that he might never be able to measure, and the consequences of failure were written in the dead fish, the vanishing neighbors, the unnatural tides, and the creeping, spectral fog. The night fell heavier than ever, the sky swollen with black clouds that obscured the moon, casting the town into an unnatural darkness that seemed to press against every surface, every shadow, and every heartbeat. Liam sat in his room, knees drawn to his chest, eyes fixed on the tank where Nereus glimmered in the faint ambient light, fins undulating with mesmerizing fluidity, amber eyes reflecting both the intelligence and the command that had governed their bond for weeks. The boy's hands trembled as he touched the glass, feeling the pulsing energy emanating from the creature, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat, a silent insistence that survival, loyalty, and obedience were now inseparable. Outside, the fog pressed against the house like a living entity, curling along the roof, wrapping the yard in thick greenish-silver tendrils that obscured the familiar shapes of trees, fences, and neighboring homes. The tide had risen impossibly, waves crashing against streets and foundations, as though the ocean itself had been called forth to enforce Nereus's will. And Liam could hear the faint, eerie cries of something or someone lost to the fog and water. His chest heaved, and for the first time, he fully comprehended the scale of the choice before him. To preserve the creature, he would have to act, perhaps in ways that would haunt him forever, and to resist was to risk the lives of all around him. The first test came swiftly. A sudden, violent crashing from the living room made him flinch. He ran, heart hammering, and saw the fog seeping beneath the doorway, tendrils curling into the room like serpents. And in the center of the chaos, a neighbor, a young boy who had once waved to him in the street, stood paralyzed, eyes wide with fear, barely visible through the haze. Liam froze. He knew, without thinking, that Nereus had brought the boy here, testing him, demanding obedience, an unspoken equation: act and ensure survival, hesitate and witness destruction. The creature pulsed violently in the tank, amber eyes flashing like molten fire, and Liam felt the weight of its expectations crush him, pressing every moral instinct into conflict. He whispered, almost inaudibly, I can't. I don't know what to do." The boy outside flinched as if he had heard, and the fog responded, curling closer, pressing tighter, suffocatingly, and Liam realized the horrifying truth. Hesitation would not be forgiven. Nereus was loyal, yes, but its loyalty demanded action, and action carried consequences far beyond what his young mind could grasp. Liam's trembling hands moved over the tank, placing food and carefully adjusting the water, trying to appease Nereus, but the creature remained agitated, thrashing occasionally, the amber glow flaring in warning. The tide outside hit with renewed force, sending a wave crashing into the street, shattering the quiet with a roar that seemed alive, purposeful, as if the ocean itself were an extension of the creature's will. The neighbor boy took a hesitant step forward, frozen in fear, and Liam understood that Nereus had created this test intentionally to force him to confront the moral cost of his loyalty, to measure whether he would act to protect the creature even when the price might include harm to the innocent. Sweat ran down Liam's face as he pressed his palms against the glass, speaking softly, pleading with the creature, begging for guidance. Yet he understood the reality. Nereus did not guide, it demanded, it expected, and survival required obedience. The fog thickened, rolling into the room until the air was heavy with moisture and brine, and the outline of the neighbor boy wavered, distorted, flickering like a candle in the wind. A scream tore through the haze, human and spectral at once, and Liam's stomach twisted with guilt and terror. He realized that the fog, the tide, the dead fish, the vanished neighbors, every unnatural occurrence was a test of his loyalty and resolve. The creature's amber eyes glowed brighter than ever, pulsating in a rhythm that reverberated through the walls, the floors, the very air, and Liam understood that Nereus had been teaching him, shaping him, forcing him to internalize the cost of survival in a way that no adult, no law, no ordinary moral framework could prepare him for. Every instinct in his young body screamed to flee, to abandon the creature, to turn his back on the covenant and the impossible demands it carried. But he could not. Curiosity, attachment, love, and the unnameable weight of responsibility held him fast. A sudden, violent crash from outside made him stagger. The tide had breached further into the street, water surging along the sidewalks, carrying with it objects from distant shorelines, driftwood twisted into unnatural forms, broken crates with unidentifiable contents, fish and other creatures, dead, floating unnaturally. And in the fog, he saw shapes moving, neighbors, or perhaps the echoes of neighbors, moving with grotesque distortion, reaching for the house, for him, their cries swallowed by the dense, briny haze. The moral choice crystallized before him: obey and risk the lives of others to preserve the creature, or defy and risk its wrath, the full force of a being older, more powerful, and indifferent to human morality than he had ever imagined. Panic coiled in his stomach, and yet his gaze returned to the tank, to Nereus's eyes, glowing with unwavering expectation. Loyalty, he realized, had become the price of survival. He acted. Hands shaking, he reached into the tank, placing his palm against the slick, glimmering surface of Nereus's body, whispering apologies, pledges, promises that felt inadequate even as they escaped his lips. The creature responded, a pulse of amber light that surged through the water, rippling outward into the room, into the fog, into the street beyond. And suddenly, the tide receded slightly, the fog thinned, the distant cries stilled. Liam staggered back, lungs burning, realizing that he had acted correctly, that the creature had acknowledged his obedience. But the relief was brief, almost non-existent. He understood with bone-deep clarity that the price was ongoing. Nereus would always demand, the covenant never complete, the moral weight forever pressing. And then came the twist. From the fog outside, a shape emerged, impossibly tall, scales glinting, fins slicing through the mist, eyes glowing faintly amber like Nereus's own. Liam's breath caught in terror. It was another creature, larger, older perhaps, a parent or perhaps a predator, its presence radiating authority and latent menace, and it paused at the edge of the yard, observing. Nereus responded with agitation, the water in the tank thrashing violently, amber eyes flaring with intensity, and Liam realized that his bond was being tested further. This other being represented the consequence of harboring loyalty, the other side of the covenant he had entered, and his actions would determine not just his fate, but the fate of the town, of Nereus, and perhaps the boundaries of the natural world itself. The boy's chest heaved as he understood the impossible choice before him: submit fully, risking all else, or defy, risking everything he loved. A second wave of fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, and the shapes outside moved closer. Liam's mind raced, panic and fear blending with a strange, intoxicating resolve. He could hear the faint gurgle of the tide, the whisper of water against walls, the subtle pulse of Nereus's eyes in the tank, and he understood with clarity: loyalty meant action, and action meant sacrifice. He did not yet know the full extent of the sacrifices required, but he could feel their weight pressing against him, the moral dilemma sharp and immediate. And yet, as he pressed his palms against the glass and whispered to the creature, promising obedience, protection, survival, he realized something else, an unspoken truth. Nereus was loyal, yes, but not cruel. It demanded obedience, yes, but only as a way to survive, to exist, and perhaps in its own alien intelligence, to teach him the balance between duty, responsibility, and the unknowable currents of the world. Time blurred. The fog, the tides, the distant cries, the unnatural light of Nereus's eyes all merged into a single, continuous moment of suspense, terror, and revelation. Liam's body shook with the effort of maintaining calm, of obeying, of navigating the impossible moral labyrinth. Outside, shapes moved in the mist, wavering between reality and nightmare, and yet slowly the chaos began to recede, the tide pulling back, the fog thinning, as though the world had accepted his actions, his obedience, his bond with the creature. Nereus pulsed once, a single, steady amber glow, and Liam felt an almost indescribable sense of relief, mixed with dread. The covenant remained, alive and unbroken, but the cost was permanent, invisible yet undeniable, a burden he would carry forever. As dawn broke, silver light filtering faintly through dissipating clouds and mist, Liam sat on the floor beside the tank, exhausted, trembling, yet strangely at peace. Nereus glimmered beside him, amber eyes calm, fins moving lazily in fluid motions that seemed almost content. The town outside was eerily silent, streets empty, tidal debris scattered, fog lingering only in low patches, and Liam understood the fragile equilibrium they had achieved.